So if you focus too much on one specific thing like golf and you have one specific motion, you do run the risk of injury and burnout and all those bad things. And you don't have to be a world beater at the age of 12 or 14 years old. Some of the best players are ones that develop and they just continue to develop each year and get better and better and better. And then by the time they're graduating college and they're getting out and they're going onto that PGA or LPGA tour, wherever they're going, that's when they need to be able to peak.
Welcome to The Golf Parent, where you get access to the best minds in junior golf. Dale, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So off air, we were talking a little bit and you were educating me on the American development model that they use in Olympic sports, athletics, and golf. I think that's a really good place to maybe start this conversation. What is the American development model and how can it be relevant to golf?
So for short, it's the ADM. A lot of people know it as that, but it's a model that's based on different stages of their age and not only chronological age, but more their physical maturation. And each distinct stage has its own focus. So like stage one is 0 to 6 years old. They call it an active start. And you're starting into athletics. You're getting involved in multiple different sports and just playing. You're having fun, just out playing, getting used to physical activity. I know one of the keys they say is, no child should be sedentary for more than 60 minutes at any time unless they're sleeping. So, get them away from screens and let them go out and have fun. Let them learn to play, to be active. And that's from like 0 to 6 years old for both boys and girls. And then there's the next stage, which is fundamentals. And it's basically, they always capitalize the fun part of it is make sure they're having fun, like teach kids to have fun. And it's maybe a tiny bit more organized, but they're just having fun. They're playing, they're learning actual motor development programs that they're going to use later on in life. And they're learning, they shouldn't be in one necessary sport or one activity. They should be learning to throw. They should be learning to jump. They should be learning to strike things. You're trying to create an athlete and then later on turn them into golfers and then later on specialize. And this can be used, this is why it's used for multiple different sports. You don't want to create a golfer and then later on in life try to make them an athlete. It's much easier to do it the other way. And so it has different stages and different guidelines. It's slightly different. It's usually about a year apart for boys and girls because the girls usually mature a little bit faster than the boys. But when they're doing it, it has different tendencies where, the fundamentals, you're learning about fun. You're just having fun. The ABCs, which is agility, balance, coordination, and speed. You're learning those things. And you're learning them in different ways. You're not doing one sport. I think too many people think that you should be just focusing solely on golf, which causes long-term injuries. It causes burnout. It causes all sorts of problems. And we want them to be athletes first and then go and specialize in golf later on. So it's a great development model. It has 6 or 7 different stages, depending on which way you go. But it kind of guides you through when you should be focusing on what. And there's a lot of research behind it, and it's actually really good.
It makes so much sense. And even right there, the ABCs. So we're talking agility, balance, coordination, and speed. That just makes so much sense because those kind of are the fundamental building blocks of any athlete is to understand each one of those 4 kind of core components. And it doesn't matter what sport they're going to get into after that. Is that so 0 to 6? And then I'm assuming it's from 6 to what's the next core when they're doing the fundamentals?
Fundamentals is 6 to 8 for girls and 6 to 9 for boys.
Okay.
And then you've got learn to play.
And that's what they're maybe starting to specialize a little bit in 1 or 2 of the sports that they are most interested in?
There are still multiple sports. And that's girls, it's usually like 8 to 11, boys 9 to 12. Again, the boys tend to lag just about a year behind as far as maturation. But they're teaching fundamental golf. They're learning fundamental golf skills in that. They're learning how to chip, how to pitch, how to swing a driver. They're just general concepts, but they're not only about golf. And that's one of the things, like when I run my junior program here, in the past I've had parents kind of question, like, why is my kid throwing a football? This is golf practice. Or why are they, running an obstacle course for their warm up, and they're jumping and they're, having to crawl and jump and do all these different activities in a warm up, and they're learning agility. They're running through things back and forth, and it's kind of like, this is kind of weird for golf, but they're learning fundamental movement patterns. They're not just only golf specific. So that's the learn to play there. You're introducing, bounding and jumping and all sorts of different things into that phase.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a second, Dale. So everybody's familiar with the Earl Woods, Tiger Woods, the King Richard, Serena
Hmm.
Venus Williams. So there seems to be this like desire that you're like, hey, if I really want my child to be a hockey player, basketball, baseball, or golfer, that early specialization, really get them focused from an early age. Let them play a little bit of other stuff, just almost as an obligatory thing, but really hyper focus them. Now, you've been teaching for, believe, over 25 years. Is that correct?
Yeah, almost 30 now.
Almost 30 now. Don't mean to date you here, but that's a
Yeah,
lot of
no, it's been a while.
it's a lot of
Yeah.
experience. So, how have you seen then those junior kids that come into your orbit, the ones that have been hyper specialized? What are you seeing that track? Because you mentioned things like injury, burnout, these type of things, but
Yeah.
there also has to be some sort of benefit as well, or maybe there's not, to kind of getting that 10,000 hours to become an expert as early as possible.
Yeah, I don't think there is early, early, early. It's like if you focus too much on one specific thing, like golf, and you have one specific motion, you do run the risk of injury and burnout and all those bad things. And you don't have to be a world beater at the age of 12 or 14 years old. Some of the best players are ones that develop and they just continue to develop each year and get better and better and better. And then by the time they're graduating college and they're getting out and they're going onto that PGA or LPGA tour, wherever they're going, that's when they need to be able to peak. And they may not even peak for a few years there. It may still be their rookie year is good, but it's not their peak. They're still working towards that. Um, but yeah, the early specialization thing can be very dangerous, can be very detrimental. And you have to be really careful with that. And when you take the athletes you mentioned, the Tigers, the Serenas, the people like that, they were phenomenal athletes that wound up choosing their specific sports. And they probably could have played almost any sport, but they were, Tiger especially. He was a phenomenal athlete.
That makes sense. I think this is a perfect segue then into talking a little bit about expectations. So expectations for the parent, expectation for the junior golfer. How do we manage expectations? How should we be thinking about, the expectations of golf? Let's just assume now that, the child has shown an interest in is specializing, whatever age that might be, in golf. How do we manage our expectations properly, and what have you seen?
Well, expectations can be a killer. They are, you really do have to manage them and be very careful. The thing about expectations, if you set goals, and you set SMART goals, so specific, measurable, attainable, timely, and realistic, if you set those, then you can manage your expectations. So, expectations like a SMART goal could be, I want to be able to shoot XYZ by the age of whatever it is, right? So that's specific, it's measurable, it's attainable. Well, hopefully it's attainable. Realistic and attainable are kind of similar. And you focus on the process of how you're going to get there. How am I going to get to this goal? And you don't necessarily focus on each individual outcome. You have control over the process. You really don't have that much control over the outcome. It's like when you start getting into tournaments and you start hitting shots and you listen to a lot of the experts in that field, and you start looking at like PGA Tour dispersion patterns, right? It's like a shotgun pattern. And I think the average PGA Tour, um, Scott Fawcett, you listen to him, his average 7 iron is like 28-yard dispersion, right? So it's a huge pattern. Most people are seeing the person that's winning, who's on fire that week, and they're hitting everything 15, 20 feet and making more than their share of putts. So that's who they show on TV. They show on TV the person winning. They don't show the average player missed the cut. If you're talking 150 people and only 70 make the cut or 60, then the average person already went home, or the average tour player for that week went home. So that kind of sets unrealistic expectations that, hey, this is how these people play all the time. And what you really do is you control the process, you control what you think about, you you go with your commitment and trust, and are you flexible and adaptive to your situation, and then you just hit the best shot at that moment that you can. And it's like that shotgun pattern. You don't know which one's coming out, but if you've done all your work, hopefully a good one is. And when it's your week to win it, that's when it comes out, the pin's kind of front right and you're trying to hit it in the middle of the green, you accidentally push it and it's short right and it's right at the pin. Right. And so instead of hitting it 20 feet left and long, you just hit it stiff and no one knows other than you. And if you have a caddy, maybe your caddy, but everybody on TV or whatever, the crowd, or whatever, no one, your playing partners, if there's no one else around, they don't know you didn't just aim it right there. They just think
Yeah.
you're a hero.
And you'll see that
So I
sometimes
think that's
on
really important.
TV. I think where you'll see the player get a little sheepish with a really good shot, almost like they're embarrassed, like they're like, "That's not what I was trying to do, but I'll take it." Like and I think that that's an
Right.
important thing that you're talking about is that you do only see the best of the best shots all the time with the highlights, and it's very easy to get frustrated with yourself. I know, like I'm like a 15 handicap, and if I play with my buddies, you miss like a 6 foot putt, everybody is huffing and puffing for birdie or something. But I mean, as you mentioned with Scott Fawcett stuff, like I think it's only 50% of people are on tour are making 6 to 8 feet putts. I mean, it's not realistic to think that if you're out there playing once a week, or if you're a kid that's only 10 years old, that you're going to be making everything that you see on TV. But then
Yeah.
how do we make sure that we're dialing in then and creating the outcomes that we actually want with, I guess I'm hearing the other side of it right now, which would be like, well, should I just almost not swing loose, but should I just be like what's the counter to this where it's like you're not getting really dialed into exactly what you want to happen? You're playing a little bit more laissez-faire or a little bit relaxed. Um, does that make sense?
Well, that's where your commitment, yeah, that's the mental process. That's where that comes in. If you're getting 100% committed to your targets, your clubs, the type of shot you're selecting, and everything else, then you're not laissez-faire. Laissez-faire would be, or being lazy is just walking up, not really picking out a target, not really getting committed to your club, and then just swinging and hoping something good happens, right? So there is a process, and the process is: can I get committed to my club? Can I get committed to my target? Did I pick the right target? So there's a lot that goes into that. Did I read the lie properly? Did I pick the right type of shot? And then you do it to the best of your ability. And you just, whatever the outcome is, you have to be adaptable and flexible. And that's what some of the best players in the world are, is they're adaptable and flexible. What I see on the range is somebody hitting the same shot over and over and over again with the same club. Anybody can do that and get in a rhythm, right? You're hitting a ball every 5 to 7 seconds, 10 seconds, whatever it is, you can get in a pretty good rhythm. But that creates those false expectations. And that's the block practice versus the random practice. Block is hitting the same club, same target over and over. Random is hitting a different club to a different target. And golf is random. It's you hit a driver off the tee off one, maybe, and then the second shot, hopefully it's not that same driver from the same place. If it is, you just hit it out of bounds or lost the ball. It's hopefully I'm hitting an iron into the green, right? So you, it's very, it's a random game. We have to be super flexible and be able to adapt, just like a lot of other sports. It's starting to be football season. All of a sudden, you see one team going at half, they make a bunch of adjustments and they come back out and they play better in the second half. We have to do that on the fly as golfers. We have to do it all the time, and every shot is different. Every lie is different. And at each club, typically you go from hitting one club to a different type of club, then a different type of club, and we have to be able to adapt. And that's one of those goals is can we adapt on the fly? And that's part of the mental process. So you're not being lazy if you're committing to your process, right? And you're focused on that process, and that's what you can control. You really don't have as much control over the outcome as you think you do.
So what
And that's
would
a
you
hard thing for all of us to accept.
Yeah, big time. So you've got a high level junior then that you're working with, and they're about to go into a tournament. how would you work with them on the mental side of it to I mean, there's a bunch of elements here, but the first part of the question I'm going to ask is like how do you know that you're properly being committed to your target? You're committed to your club, you're committed to the shot. Is there a way, is there a trigger, is there a mantra, is there like how do we know? How can we judge whether or not if you were to ask, that player at the end of the shot, "Hey, were you committed or not?" How would they know?
Well, they usually can tell you. They'll know. It's one of those things where you have a pre-shot routine. Part of your pre-shot routine is you analyze the lie, you analyze the weather, wind, whatever's going on, and then you pick a specific target and in the club and the type of shot, and then you get up there and you focus and you try to do it. It's pretty easy for each player to know post shot, was I really committed? And you see it on tour a lot when somebody goes back and forth and goes to the bag, puts one club in, pulls something else out, and they do that back and forth. It's usually not a good shot because that's a good way to say, oh, they're right between clubs. They're really not getting that decisive, right? And that's a tough one. So post round mental self evaluations, we do a lot of that where there's a whole questionnaire and you go over, all right, how was I committed to each one of my shots, or what was my commitment level on those, and that's where the goal setting comes in, right? For each goal or each tournament, you have your own mental goals. So you have an outcome goal like I want to be in the top 10, or I want to win this tournament, or I want to do this. Right now, FedEx Cup, I want to get to the top 50 so I can go to next week, or I want to get to the top 25 or 30 or whatever it happens to be. And then you set process goals are the goals that help you get there. Like 100% committed to my target, 100% committed to my club, like not letting a bad shot or putt affect your next shot or putt, right? So there's all sorts of different goals that you set, and there's usually like 3 to 5 of them that you set ahead of time, and those are what you work on mentally for this tournament. And if you do a good job, usually you have a pretty good tournament. I mean, and it can be as simple as having fun no matter what you shoot. And it's amazing. The more fun you have, the better you shoot, not the other way around. So, there are different ways to kind of combat the laissez-faire or the laziness or whatever it is and be at your top mentally, because it's one of the most important things. If you can be at your top of your game mentally, you'll usually play pretty well.
So just to kind of create a running list here, what are the 3 to 5 process-driven goals that you have seen your players use to great success?
It just varies. Everybody's different. So everybody has different tendencies. Just like each swing is different, everybody has different mental tendencies too. So it can be anything from 100% commitment to my club or target. That's usually a big one. Usually not letting what others do affect them. Staying in the moment, right? Like just focusing on one shot at a time, which is, I know that old cliche, but just staying present and focusing on what they're doing right at that second. It can be asking yourself some form of the question of, what do I want to do here? Where do I want to hit this? Or what's my target on this shot? And then just going, all right, I'm going to hit this shot at this time to the best of my ability, and just go ahead and do it. Not getting too caught up in, oh, what might happen. And that can be another one, is not creating stories. Because we do with expectations, we create stories that haven't happened yet, right? If I could do this, or this might happen, or that might happen, and they haven't. And when we have the ability to write our own stories, and just catching yourself that you might be playing and say, Ryan, stop. That's irrelevant. I want to get back at the task at hand, which is I want to hit this ball to that target. And then you just boil it down to that, because that's all it is. It's not one 18-hole round. It's not 2 9-hole rounds. It's one shot at a time. You could think of each shot as a little mini tournament. That's your tournament, is the shot that you're hitting right now. And once it's over, it's gone. And you move on to the next one. That's one of the things Tiger's unbelievable at. And I remember Nick Price when he was #1 in the world, and this was when I was younger, and I don't think I'll ever forget this, but somebody had asked him at one point, you don't react to your ball when you've hit it. And I think this might have been even in '95 when he won the PGA. And he said, yeah, as soon as it leaves the club face, it's in the past. And I thought to myself, whoa, man, that's pretty powerful stuff, right? As soon as it left the club face, it's in the past. There's nothing he can do about it. All he can do is go prepare for the next shot, right? And that's pretty amazing to me to have that mental outlook.
So was he literally not like watching the shot, or he just was like stoic about whatever the outcome was? Good
No,
shot, bad
yeah, you
shot.
just didn't see him. Yeah, it was more that you didn't see him react. You didn't see him leaning one way or the other. You didn't see him waving with his hand. You didn't see him, doing any of that stuff. It was just he'd watch it, look at it, and go, okay, and then move on. And it's like that's an unbelievable mental strength right there to be able to do that.
Well, we can talk at nauseum about the mental side of the game, which I think we will because that is incredibly interesting. But you talked a lot about being present, and it's hard to be present, especially when you're telling stories about, the previous shot or what may or may not happen in the future. Do you have any tips or tricks on how you can stay present, especially when you find your mind starting to wander during the round?
Sure, it's number one is being aware of your thoughts, right? That's one of the things that we can control is being aware of our thoughts. And when you catch yourself, you tell yourself to stop. It's irrelevant. Go back to refocus yourself. Tell yourself, get back to the task at hand. And that's one of the biggest things is just being aware of that. The other one is breathing, right? A lot of people talk about meditation and just box breathing, 4 seconds in, 4 second hold, 4 second exhale, 4 seconds out and just being able to do that, the box breathing for a couple breaths can actually physiologically change how you're reacting to things. So, there's breathing techniques, there's being aware of our thoughts. Those two are the main ones. And then just being able to refocus and telling yourself, okay, what do I want to do here now that I'm in this situation? What do I do? And that's hopefully part of what kids practice is getting good at that. And that's adaptation, right? It doesn't Our plans don't always go the way we want. We might want to hit it right down the middle and all of a sudden you're in the left or right rough or in the trees or something and your plan changes and you have to be able to adapt. And that's being aware of thoughts, catching yourself and using the adaptation principles to be able to deal with whatever you're facing at the moment.
And
And
I'm
then you
assuming
learn from that.
Yeah, definitely, and I'm assuming the adaptability as well also plays into every day. Your body's feeling a little bit different. You're swinging it a little bit different. Your shot shape may even be a little bit. You may be hitting fades instead of draws, whatever it might be. How do you just accept that? On the range or the warm up for the round, as
Yeah.
opposed to trying to kind of muscle or fix it, or trying to go into panic mode to be like, wait a second, I'm this doesn't feel right. Like, how do
Yeah.
you just kind of accept what you have
Right.
that day?
Well, obviously that's not ideal, going into it and not feeling good about the swing or whatever. Hopefully, if you're working with somebody for any length of time, they know their tendencies and they know, all right, I know my tendencies. My coach has given me tools that I can deal with those tendencies and I know how to do it. Let's say somebody tends to I'll use myself for example. I don't play for months at a time because I'm too busy, and then I try to go play in tournaments. My tendency is for my left hand grip to get too weak, and then I miss shots to the right. So I know when I'm warming up, if I'm missing shots to the right, I know the first thing to do is check my grip. Is my grip strong enough in my left hand? Am I open in the face? And so you can kind of know your tendencies and hopefully get yourself back on track. That's the ultimate goal, is to be able to be self-sufficient where you know your tendencies, you know how to fix those. And that's what experience teaches us, right? And that's the ideal thing. And then also having a go-to shot when things aren't great. You have a go-to, whether it's a left to right ball flight instead of right to left, or it's a three-quarter shot instead of a full swing, or there's just some tendency that you have where you can get the ball around and you just figure out how to get it around where it's still in play and it's still good enough, that you can shoot a good score. Because that's great golf is not shooting a good score when you're striping it. That's pretty easy when you're hitting it great and putting great and everything feels great. A really incredible round is when everything doesn't feel great and you shoot that same score. That's when that's the amazing part. So that's part of the adaptivity. It's like, can we still shoot a good score when we don't have our best stuff?
Uh, I mean, easier said than done, but that is the game. I mean, we talked about Tiger a lot in this podcast, and like Tiger was famous for saying that he would only hit like maybe 1, 2 shots exactly the way he wanted per tournament or like per round. Like it's not he's being forced to have to adapt to missing what he actually was trying to do. And if you get discouraged or if you get thrown off by that, I guess it's the compounding the negativity is really what we're talking about here. Because if you don't do the things you're saying, you have a tendency to kind of spiral away. What do we do when we feel like that's happening? Like do you have any I mean, we've talked a lot about this, but I mean, you must see that a lot where you see players compound the bad shot. How do we not do that?
Yeah, I mean, that can be one of the process goals, right? Is to not let one bad shot affect the next shot, right? So being aware of that, that's where you have to be aware of the thoughts. And it kind of goes back to those same principles, being aware of your thoughts, having a strategy to manage a golf course, and then only changing that strategy if weather dictates, or if it's maybe the last hole of a tournament and you got to do something to make a cut, or well, it wouldn't be the last day of the tournament, but last hole to make some unbelievable, make an eagle, because a birdie's not going to do it, or you have to make a birdie because a par is not going to do it, or something like that. That's the only time you'd really want to change it, that and weather. So hopefully you have a strategy and you're strong enough mentally to just stick with that strategy and not let the other holes, determine what you do. Because if you're looking at it that way and you get a couple over par, or you're not off to a good start, and you let that change what you do, normally your strategy is set up to maximize your skill set, right? And then when you go away from that, now you're going away from maximizing your strategy for your current skill set. So it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And experience usually teaches you that. You do it once or twice or a few times, and then you start looking back at it and journaling about it. What did I learn? Not necessarily what were my stats, but what did I learn? And it might be, all right, I changed my strategy and it didn't work out, right? And that's one of the things. It's just being aware of your strategy, setting up a strategy ahead of time, right? Knowing what club you're going to hit off the tee and where your target's going to be, and then adjusting that for the wind, or if you get a different wind or whatever wind you get. But that's when you adjust it, not because the last hole you made a bogey or a double or something like that. I remember one of the tour players I used to work with, and he had knocked it on a par 5 and 2, three putted for par. Was really upset. Goes to the next hole where he's supposed to hit an iron off the tee, pulls out driver, which was not a good play. Hits it too far through the fairway into the trees and makes double. And then, it's like it just spiraled from there. And it was like, okay, well, it's one bad putt made him change his strategy. And then that really failed and backfired. Right. So rarely does being overly aggressive pay off. You set your strategy according to your skill set, and then you try to stick with that.
I love this talk of strategy because you don't hear that as much as I believe that we need to. Can we go inside your mind here for a second? And you're working with an elite junior, and it's tournament week. So, can you kind of on a like a high level, 3,000 foot view? How are you getting that player ready in the days leading up to the tournament, during the tournament, after the tournament? What's the process? What are you having them kind of focus on? Can you just kind of take us through that week of what you would be doing?
Mhm. Well, there's kind of periodization, right? So, building up to like a big tournament, they're going hopefully a lot less technique and a whole lot more play. So it's more play based. It's you're not focusing on your technique as much, right? It's maybe where if they're going through a swing change, it might be 75-80% technique, 20%, 25% play. When you're in tournament, it's much more flipped the opposite way. So they're getting ready, they're hitting shots, they're playing. They might even be, if they don't have access to a golf course for a day or so, they're playing golf on the range. They're hitting different shots, picking different targets with different clubs. They're randomizing their practice. They might even be playing competitive games against other juniors, or just amongst themselves, like trying to get up and down a certain number of times, or just a short game handicap test and seeing what their score can be. So it's more play based. It's more active, and then hopefully they're playing a bunch of golf, right? Kind of playing their way into a tournament, and then you know, after the first round, they may work on whatever they quite didn't feel was great that day. If they felt like everything was pretty good, maybe they just do a short little cool down, maybe even not, and then they get away from golf. You can't always be golf. You got to have some balance in there. So in the evenings, it's hanging out with friends, it's watching movies, reading books, doing stuff like that. And then the next day, it's kind of repeat. You're going out there, getting ready, warming up, doing your normal stuff. Go out, compete. And I should go back and say, after day one, part of their thing is the post round self evaluation, the mental. You know, what did I do well? What can I do better? And then they set some process goals for that. It might be the same process goals. It might be commitment to my target. It might be having fun. It might be, not letting a bad shot or a good shot affect the next one. Whatever it happens to be, those 3 to 5 keys. And then they're going to focus on those that next round. And then they do the same thing. It's like, all right, how was my game? What did I do well? What did I not quite do as well? I'm going to go work on that for a few minutes. And then once I do that, then I'm going to go work on my post round self mental evaluation. And I'm going to go set my keys for the next day. And they do that for the tournament. And then at the end of the tournament, and there's usually some journaling involved, like, okay, what did I learn this week? Not necessarily, okay, I hit this many greens, I had this many putts, I did this many fairways. And that's great stuff to know so you can look at it later on, over a span of weeks or months, and kind of figure out what your strengths and weaknesses are. But I think it's more of, what did I learn from my experiences? What experiences that I have? What did I learn? And what can I take away to better prepare me for the next one, or the next event, or for the future when I incur those same circumstances?
Uh, awesome stuff. The mentality of winning. So when you're seeing those players that seem to have, I mean, there seems to be this thought that they need that killer instinct. They need that kind of like aggressive play. But then we talked about earlier that, playing aggressive golf oftentimes doesn't work out. So then playing conservative or safe, or label it as smart, like, how do you balance that winning kind of, dog mentality of like that hyper competitive wanting to win versus that calm, cool, zen kind of mentality? Like what have you seen? Or is it
Right.
individual for each player, or does there seem to be
It's
a pattern?
Yeah, it's somewhat individual, and it's not that you're not playing aggressive. You're making aggressive swings to conservative targets, and not even that conservative. You're just playing smart. It's just, if you've got a pin on the right side and you got a long club in and it's tucked over by water, you might be aiming 15, 20, 25 feet left, because it's just percentages. You're just, the whole reason Vegas is in business is it's percentages, and the percentages are in their favor, right? We want to switch those percentages and make them a little more in our favor. And again, you get that spray pattern going where normal dispersion pattern for a right hander misses or short right to long left. If you don't know which one's coming out when, then you're just trying to aim the center one, and hopefully you hit the center one. And on your week that you're going to win, the pin's back left, and you hit that long left, pattern comes out. Or if it's short right, you hit that one. But you're not trying to hit that. You're not aiming left and a little long and going, well, I'll just push it in there and short. You're just aiming to a smart place. And, if you hit it 15, 20 feet and you're on one week with putting and you're making a little more than your share, those are the weeks you win too. And I think experience teaches people where they need to be. Some people get too cautious when they get up near a lead, and then others get too aggressive. And it's just a fine line of balancing that. And experience teaches us that. The more you put yourself in that situation, the more you learn what your tendencies are, and the more you can deal with them and combat them. I think that's how you do it. I think it's individual specific.
So as a parent, what can we do to put our child more in those situations while also kind of managing the downstream effect of our impact on our child? And maybe we can tackle this question from, we talked about the American development model where you had those kind of stages of development. Let's maybe look at the stages of a golfer now. So maybe it's from, the 10 to 12 to 14 to whatever the age that seems to make sense for you from the junior golf side. What can a parent do to best set up their child for success? And what are some of the pitfalls that they're doing that can be kind of holding back their child as well?
I think a lot of it can be expectations, right? So you're not really going to specialize in maybe golf year round as your main sport and maybe one other one at the most until you're like 15 for girls and about 16 for boys. Okay. So allowing them to play multiple sports, not getting burned out, managing the amount of time they spend on any one specific activity is really important until that age. And then at that age, they can start being much more specific and competing in that one or two sports. Okay. So expectations are really important and not putting too much pressure on them to win immediately and just putting more of the focus on, okay, the process. What's the process? How are we going to continue to improve? What are your, and this is where the stats come in. What were your stats the last few months and what are they now? What's the up and down percentage? How many fairways are you hitting right? How many are you missing left, right, center, and how many are you hitting? Same thing with greens. And it's just continuing to get better and then focusing on the areas that are maybe weakest or lacking instead of what everybody likes to go do stuff they're good at. It's fun to, if you're bomb drives, it's fun to bomb drives. But if you're not so great at putting, it's maybe not so much fun to go miss 5 and 6 footers. So we have to design a plan, and the parents can sit down with the kids, not right after a tournament, but during an off week when they're not emotionally charged about something and say, what's our plan? What do we need to work on to help you, or how can we help you get better? And then let the junior tell you. And then, have some stats to back it up. I think that's important. Because if they say, oh, well, I did this, and you could look back at it and say, well, actually, you're pretty good at that. Maybe we need to work on your sand game because your sand save percentage is 25% instead of 50 or whatever it happens to be. And that's where you kind of go from expectations is just set the right expectations, focus on the process, focus on getting better, not always winning. And then if you continue to get better, you'll start winning.
Again, makes sense. What is something that after close to 30 years now of you being in the coaching world, what is maybe one or two things that you wish you knew when you were back, kind of starting out your golf career as a junior?
Oh boy. Well, I mean, we didn't even have really the American um, junior development model. I didn't really start until I was playing until I was 17. So for me personally, I didn't have that. I played all sorts of different sports, um, and I struggled finding good instruction. So I did it purely on athletic ability. I look back at my swing back then, I go, oh boy, surprised I could do as well as I did. Um, but I did pretty well. So, it was just athleticism. But I played, just about every sport you could think of other than football and hockey. I didn't do those two, but I did just about everything else. Um, so, that gives you a good background in movement patterns and the ABCs, right? That agility, balance, coordination, and speed. So it gives you a pretty good aspect in that. I think you know, you don't need to practice a ton to get better. You need to practice efficiently and not as much as I did. I overdid it, and I had some injuries and some overuse things. I had a freak injury, but I mean that was stuff that when you get acute injuries, you just that's different than overuse. But I also had some overuse ones because I thought, you know, um, if I'm not working 8 or 10 hours a day in my game, somebody else is, and they're going to get better, and I need to get that much better, right? And I think you can manage your time better and you can do shorter blocks and be more efficient with it rather than having long blocks and just, basically beanballs until you break down. So I
What
think
would
that's
be,
one of those things that's important.
can I just follow up here? So, what would be examples then
Sure.
of shorter, more intentional practice? So it's like, hey, I'm just going to practice for whatever, 40 minutes on my putting or 20 minutes on just doing like what would be examples instead of just,
Yeah, maybe you pick a drill. Like there's a tornado drill where you start a ball 2 feet away, and then the next one's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 feet. And instead of like sitting there all day until you make all 8 in a row on a really tough breaking putt, and they're not in a ladder drill or not in a straight line. They're going like a tornado or a funnel around the circle, around the hole. you give yourself a certain number of chances. Like I'm going to give myself 5 tries to see if I can make it. And that's the way I like to structure practice for kids, is because now they have a very finite number of tries. They look forward to it because it's a challenge, and there's no dread because they're not like, oh, I'm only here for 5 misses. I'm not going to be here for an hour and a half doing the same thing. And I think that's an important point is, again, we still want to make it, even though they're getting hopefully older and more developed at this stage, it still needs to be fun. It can't be this boring, mundane, like, I don't want to go practice thing. It needs to be fun. It needs to be interactive. It needs to be a challenge, right? So they know when they get up over there, okay, I can do this. Hitting 100 putts in a row from 2 feet, that's just going to make your back sore, right? And I'd much rather, you don't feel any pressure on the first 75 or 80. It's like, oh, big deal, you know? So playing different games and doing different things and changing the way you practice so that it's more efficient, it's a much more efficient way of doing it.
That was incredible.
And
I've never heard that. The tornado drill, 5 attempts, which creates manufacturer's pressure, but it also, it creates a finite block time for putting.
right,
Could you maybe give the parents listening an example of maybe short game, an example of maybe chipping or pitching, mid irons or scoring irons and driving?
sure.
Like, what are some examples of ways to practice
Yeah,
efficiently
I
with
mean,
those
you could.
clubs?
Right. So short game, you could do a handicap test, right? So I've got a little short game handicap test. I've got a condensed version and a full version. I usually give them the condensed version. It's maybe 45 minutes, and you just hit that and you see where you take your score. If so, for instance, let's say you hit a shot that finishes it goes in the hole and you get 3 points. And if it's 0 to 3 feet away from the hole, it's 2 points. If it's 3 to 6, it's 1 point. And if it's 6 to 10, it's 0, and if it's outside 10 feet, it's a negative point or two. So they go through the handicap test and they see what their score is, and that might be their practice. So each shot counts, right? If you're trying to get a total on something, and you're trying to beat your personal best, whatever that is, each shot counts. And so you add it up at the end and you see what you got, and it puts, you hit a bad shot, it makes you feel like there's more pressure on the next one. And it's a great way to simulate playing golf, and that can be a fun way of doing it. And maybe you only do that once. You just do the one test a day, and that's all you're able to do. So that can be a fun one to do. And maybe you might even practice technique ahead of time, and you might practice that for 10 or 15 minutes, 20 minutes max. But we know that one of the biggest things is attention spans are only about 20 minutes, 25 absolute max. So you don't want to be doing any one thing for longer than that. So if you're going to practice full swing for a long time, it might be a 10-minute warm up or 15-minute warm up, and then you're doing 15, 20 minutes of that, and then it's on to something else. Now, if you want to come back and practice your full swing after, then you're going to practice your full swing another 20 minutes, and then it's on to something different. So instead of hitting balls for 2 hours, you're going to mix everything in little 20-minute increments. And as far as, that's another short game. That's obviously chipping and pitching in bunkers and stuff like that. Putting, there's little sensors that you can buy to measure different parts of your stroke. And you might be working on your forward stroke time and you want it to be a certain amount of time. And you might give yourself, I don't know, a few tries. Maybe it's 20 chances to get that, see how close you can get it to that one number. And while you're hitting putts, the certain distance, right? So you get block sets of time that are finite, that I've only got this much time to do it, and I have this many tries. So it's not like I want people firing balls. Like there's some driving ranges that I've been to that they charge you by the amount of time you're there, and it seems like everybody there is just hitting balls as fast as they can, one after another, just like rapid fire.
Mm.
I don't think that's real
Well, you're also
conducive to getting
potentially
better.
ingraining the wrong movement and movement pattern into your subconscious, which is
Yeah,
not
quality
productive.
over quantity is really important. So we want quality practice. It doesn't have to be as long if you've got a lot higher quality to it, right? Full swing can be, all right, I've got a certain number of tries to hit a certain number of shots. There's 9 ball flights. You could be practicing, if you're practicing ball flight control. It could be, all right, I'm trying to hit a certain number of greens. I've got a green that's 100 yards, one that's 150, and one that's 200. And I have to hit the green a certain number of times out of 10 shots, and you get 10 shots to do it. Or if you're lucky enough to have access to some kind of launch monitor, a lot of them have combines or ones that you can actually create on your own. I've done that with the one I have, and I've got a wedge combine on there that I have people practice on and say, okay, you have to score. You've got 3 chances to run through this wedge combine. And you can set the number of shots to it. It might be 15 shots, it might be 10 shots, whatever it is. And you have to get a score of a certain handicap or a certain score or better. And or you're trying to better your best score. And so there's lots of different ways to be creative with practice. You just have to do it in a way that really helps you further get along, better. And that this isn't, we're not talking about, this isn't the time where you're really working on one specific technical aspect. This is kind of like practicing to get better, to play better, right? Because if you're working technique, that's a little different, right? You
How would
can
that be
work
different?
technique. Well, you can work technique at home. You don't even need to hit a golf ball. You can be in your backyard. You can make 20, 25 swings somewhere in your house, in your backyard. If you're somewhere where it's inclement weather or cold in the wintertime, you can go in the basement, garage, whatever, make 20 or 25 swings. And then if you have a video of what that should look like, you can go watch that video 20 times. Or you can go sit down in a quiet room in a chair and visualize what would it look like, what would it feel like to make that swing, almost like you're out of body, kind of like watching a movie of yourself, and what would that look like and what would it feel like. And that's some of the best practice you can actually do. People that can do that actually improve much more than people that are just hitting balls all the time. It's amazing when you learn the mental aspect of it and how much the brain plays a role in it. And doing something like that in front of a mirror, just rehearsing little swings, maybe for 5 minutes before you go to bed, can really help ingrain that feel.
And even I'm assuming visualizing your performance during a tournament, like on each hole, like what each shot you want, like using those visualization techniques for the actual course play as well.
Yeah, both ahead of time, maybe the night before, you can visualize what, lying down, relax, stay quiet. You can visualize yourself playing the first few holes or any trouble holes or even the whole round if you got the time. And then obviously, part of your pre-shot routine can be visualizing what you want to have happen. It's a quick practice swing. You see the ball flight in your mind, what either some people can see the whole flight, other people just see the ball kind of falling out of the air and landing, whichever one you can do. But you just do that, and then the shot itself is basically, that was the trailer of the movie, and here's the movie. I'm trying to, hopefully going to play the full movie of what I just saw. And then you just convince yourself, all right, my objective or my goal is that I want to hit this ball at that target, and boom, just go do it to the best of your ability.
Dale, you've dropped so much value in such a short span of time. For those viewers and those listeners that are just like, okay, listen, I'd love to, get in your ecosystem, learn more about what you do, work with you directly. What's the best way for people to kind of find you and work with you?
It's probably just through my website, which is daleabraham.com. And it's Abraham, like Abraham Lincoln, Abraham. But if they go to daleabraham.com, at least it's got my contact info on there, and they can get a hold of me that way.
Yeah, awesome. Do you have any parting kind of advice for those parents that are, trying to do the best that they can to nurture and guide their junior golfer on their path through this beautiful game?
Yeah, it's treat them like you treat your best friend when they're out there, right? I mean, a lot of times our parent-child relationships are different than that, but we want to treat them like we would our best friends. If they hit bad shots, you can be encouraging. When they play a really good tournament, that's the time not to be negative, but to be a little bit more critical and go deeper dive into it, because they're probably going to be more receptive. It's treating them with, well, praising. When you're going to praise them, it has to be sincere, right? It can't be false praise. It's got to be sincere. And you want to praise effort, not necessarily results. It's much more important to praise effort, especially when they're younger, than it is results, right? Like my daughter, for instance, she'll swing and miss, and if she swung really hard, that was awesome. Great job. You swung really fast. That's cool. Working on speed training versus just where the ball went, right? I rarely, if she hits a good shot, I'll still say, "Oh, that was a good shot." But I like to praise her effort, which then encourages more effort, right? Um, and then praising only results really makes the kids focus only on results. And the result should be, am I growing? Am I getting better? Am I progressing? Am I learning my tendencies and getting better at what I don't do as well? Not did I hit this shot well? Did I hit that shot well? Right? Because as the better we get, those shots are going to get better too. Right? So just treat your junior like you treat your best friends. Obviously you still got to be a parent, but from the golf side of it, when things are tough, you know, let them, don't get in their face. Don't yell at them. Don't be you know, the, the dads or moms that get overly emotional with it. We have to separate ourselves from that and then treat them and understand that they're still kids. They're still juniors. They're still learning. They're still growing. And hopefully if they're learning and growing, they're getting better and they learn from their experiences. And I think that's the biggest one is, kind of treat them like that and you'll be surprised at how much they can exceed your expectations, hopefully.
Dale, beautiful. Very well said. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ryan. It was a pleasure.